They said don't waste medicine on her. I heard it, every word. My daughter said it standing just a few feet from my hospital bed, her voice firm, professional, the tone she always reserved for customer service disputes or returning clothes past the 30-day limit. But this time she wasn't arguing over a blouse. She was deciding if I was worth saving. She's had her life, she added, and I swear to you, that's when I stopped breathing. Not because of the heart episode that brought me there, but because of something worse, something that can't be measured with machines. Because I realized that for my only child, I had become not a person, but a calculation, a tab, a liability. I'm 82. I live now in a modest room above a bakery in a town where no one knows my last name. There's a single window, a firm bed, and a clock that ticks loud enough to keep me grounded. That room smells of yeast and cinnamon most mornings, and at night it holds the scent of tired stories. But I didn't arrive there by accident. I got there because one day in an emergency room, I woke up and realized I was no longer being seen as someone to protect, but someone to manage. That was the day I stopped being a mother in her eyes and became a case to close. The chest pain started mid-morning. I was watering the hydrangeas, and I thought it was just the heat, maybe a tight muscle or indigestion. I took my time going inside, sat in my armchair, drank some water, waited for it to pass. It didn't. The neighbor, a young man named Miguel, who sometimes helps me with the bins, came by to borrow a wrench and found me slumped forward. He called the ambulance. He held my hand until the sirens came. He told me I was going to be okay, and I wanted to believe him. I really did, but I'd seen enough to know that old women alone don't always get to be okay. Sometimes we get overlooked. Sometimes we get filed away. I remember the ambulance lights. I remember the rough jostling of the gurney. I remember someone asking for allergies, my name, my date of birth. But mostly, I remember the cold. Hospitals are always cold, but this felt different. It was the cold of metal decisions, of fluorescent lights that don't blink when people cry, of forms being signed without discussion. I was aware, though they didn't think I was. The morphine hadn't kicked in yet. I heard my daughter before I saw her. "Can someone tell me if she's responsive?" she asked, "because we really need to be mindful of resources." That word, resources, not love, not care, not compassion, resources. My name is Elena Ruiz. I raised her alone. Her name is Angela. She was born during a storm in late March. I still remember the sound of the rain on the hospital window and the smell of her hair when they placed her on my chest. I didn't have a partner. He had left the moment I told him I was pregnant, said he wasn't ready. I was. I worked 2 jobs for most of her childhood, cleaned houses by day, stitched hems by night. I went without so she could have piano lessons, books, glasses when hers broke during recess. I never resented it. I loved being her mother. I loved building a life for someone else, thinking one day she'd turn back and see the foundation I'd laid. But something happens when you love without boundaries for too long. You become easy to ignore. I didn't see it at first. I thought the clipped phone calls were just exhaustion. I thought the way she introduced me at parties, "This is my mom, she's sweet but a little old-fashioned," was just her way of navigating different social circles. I told myself the cancellations, the delays, the silences were about time zones, parenting stress, modern life. I didn't realize they were about roles. She had decided mine was complete, and yet when the hospital called her, she arrived swiftly, not panicked, not out of breath. She came in like someone ready to solve a problem. Her heels clicked down the corridor. She looked polished, efficient, like a woman who came prepared. I was conscious when she entered, though my eyes were closed. I felt her presence before she spoke. "What's the status?" she asked the nurse. "Because if she's not alert, I really don't want us to escalate unnecessarily." The nurse hesitated. "She's stabilizing," she said. "We're monitoring closely." Angela sighed like she was being inconvenienced. "It's just, we need to be realistic. She's 82. She's had a long life. If she can't recover, I don't want aggressive interventions. It's not worth the trauma or the bills, you know? I wanted to sit up. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say, 'What bills? I have insurance. You know that. You helped me pick the plan last year when you said I couldn't manage it on my own anymore.' But my mouth wouldn't work. The words stuck somewhere between my lungs and my dignity. That's when the doctor entered, a tall man with kind eyes. He looked at me, then at the chart, then at her. 'She's fully insured,' he said, not unkindly. Top tier. No restrictions on emergency intervention. And just like that, her tone changed. 'Oh, well, then yes, of course. Whatever she needs. I just didn't want to.' She paused, recalibrated, smiled at the nurse. 'You know how it is. We just want to do what's best for her. I've been many things in my life. Seamstress, caregiver, wife, briefly, widow, mother. But until that moment, I had never been someone's burden. I had never been someone that others debated over as if I were a broken appliance, as if the question were not how to help me, but whether I was still worth the effort. They wheeled me into observation. The pain dulled, not because of the medication, but because shock has its own anesthesia. I lay there listening to the beep of machines, the soft whoosh of air vents, the muffled sounds of doctors and nurses doing what they were trained to do. My daughter stepped out to take a call. The nurse stayed behind, a woman maybe in her 50s, sharp eyes, soft hands. She adjusted my blanket, leaned in and whispered, "You heard all that, didn't you?" I blinked slowly. She nodded. "You're not alone, you know. This happens more than you'd think. Some people don't see their elders anymore, just their expiration dates." I wanted to thank her. I couldn't. But something in me stirred, some old root, some part of me that remembered I used to fight. I used to walk 10 blocks in the rain to catch the early shift. I used to talk back to landlords who raised rents without warning. I used to sew all night so my daughter could have a new dress for picture day. I used to matter, not just in a family tree, but in the real, sweat-drenched, sleep-deprived world of making a life. That part of me, tired, faded, but not dead, shifted in that bed. Not because I was afraid to die, but because I refused to be erased. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the hospital, and in that sterile, humming space, I made a decision. If I was still alive by morning, I would reclaim something, even if it was small, even if it was just my voice. And I was, and I did. I woke up early the next morning, not because I'd rested, but because the hospital hallway outside my door echoed with footsteps and quiet conversations spoken in the language of early shift fatigue. I watched the light change on the ceiling tiles as dawn arrived, slow and indifferent. A nurse came in, took my vitals, asked me to rate the pain on a scale from 1 to 10. I said 5. It was closer to 6, but I didn't want anyone thinking I was being dramatic. Old women are always accused of that. Exaggeration, sentimentality, confusion. I wanted to be none of those things. I wanted to be coherent, factual, undeniable. I asked if I could see my chart. The nurse hesitated. Protocol, she said, but eventually handed me a digital tablet with the records on it. I scrolled slowly, reading the words that others had written about my body, my prognosis, my future. It was all there, neatly logged and coded: elevated enzymes, suspected angina, responsive to medication, stable, no signs of cognitive impairment. I stared at that last line. No signs. I whispered it to myself. I wanted to print it out, tape it to my forehead. I needed someone to see me as I still was, here, lucid, alive, not fading. My daughter arrived just after 8, holding a coffee and talking on the phone with someone about a deadline. She didn't greet me right away. She stood in the corner, facing away from the bed, her voice low and clipped. "I'll send you the numbers after I leave the hospital." "Yes, she's stable. They're doing more tests. I know. I'm hoping it doesn't drag out." That last phrase hung in the air like a wet rag. Drag out. As if I were a project that had gone over budget. As if my recovery were an inconvenience. She hung up, turned toward me, and forced a smile. "How are you feeling?" she asked in that bright, artificial tone I'd heard her use with caterers and contractors. I said I was fine. She nodded. "Good. That's good. They said you'll need to stay another night." Observation. I guess I could tell she didn't want that. She was already doing the math in her head. Lost hours, canceled meetings, the logistics of her life stretching around this unexpected disruption. I used to be her center. Now I was a scheduling problem. I asked if she'd spoken to the doctors. She said yes, briefly. I asked what they said. She paused just slightly before answering. "They're optimistic. But they mentioned long-term considerations, like maybe it's time we talk about what comes next." I didn't answer. I didn't want to. I could feel the room getting colder, not physically, but emotionally, like the warmth of family had been drained and replaced with fluorescent detachment. She took that as agreement. She pulled a folder from her bag, not a purse, her work bag, leather, expensive, with stiff zippers, the kind you use to close deals, not comfort people. She opened the folder and began flipping through papers. I brought some documents just in case. Power of attorney stuff, health directives. We talked about this, remember? We hadn't. Not really. She'd mentioned it once over the phone last year, casually while driving. I'd said, "Let's not worry about that now." And she'd said, "Just in case," and then never brought it up again. Until now. Until she thought she could slip it under the radar while I was weak, horizontal, chemically subdued. She handed me a pen. "It's just to make things smoother. If there's an emergency, this lets me speak on your behalf. It's standard. The word made me ache. Standard is what we say when we want to pretend it's not personal. When we don't want to admit we're taking control. I looked at the papers. They were already filled out. My name, her name, signatures pre-marked with little yellow tabs. She had come prepared. Like this wasn't a conversation, but a procedure, a formality. I didn't touch the pen. I looked at her face, so polished, so sure, and I thought of all the times I had fought for her, the late bills I paid to keep her in dance lessons, the days I skipped lunch so she could have her favorite cereal, the nights I sat on the edge of her bed, rubbing her back through fevers and nightmares. I remembered every moment she'd ever needed me, and how easily, how efficiently she now sought to render me silent. I said, "No," softly, but with weight. She blinked as if confused. "Mom, it's not a big deal." I repeated it. "No." This time she frowned. "Why are you being difficult?" "Because I'm not a signature on a page. Because I'm not your project. Because I'm not done yet." I didn't say any of that. I just looked at her and said, "If I need help, I'll ask for it." That was when she finally dropped the mask. Her expression changed. The impatience surfaced. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. "This is about being prepared." "I'm trying to protect you from what?" I asked. "From choices you might not like? From independence?" She didn't answer. She packed the folder back into her bag with just a bit more force than necessary. Later that day, while she was gone, I asked to speak with the hospital advocate. A young man in a blue shirt came into my room. He looked surprised at first. Most people don't request meetings, I suppose. I told him I wanted to revoke any default medical proxies that named my daughter. I asked him to note in my file that all decisions should be made in consultation with me directly, unless I was declared fully incapacitated. He asked if I had a secondary contact. I gave him the name of my niece, Sophia, a woman who once told me, after my sister's funeral, "If you ever need someone who doesn't treat you like a burden, call me." He made the changes, asked if I wanted legal backup. I said yes. He nodded. Efficient, respectful, the opposite of what I'd expected. That night, Angela returned, but I didn't mention what I'd done. She brought flowers this time. Daisies, the kind I used to put in her lunchbox on her birthday. I looked at them and felt nothing. No warmth, just the artificial scent of performance. She smiled and said, "You're looking stronger." I nodded. She didn't stay long. Said something about meetings, the kids, traffic. I told her to go. She kissed my cheek like she was checking something off a list. After she left, I stared at the flowers for a long time. Then I reached for the trash can and dropped them in slowly, stem by stem. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I was no longer a mother in her life. I was a file she wanted to keep neat. But I am not a file. I am not a case. I am a woman who once carried her through fevers, through divorces, through her own broken-hearted decisions, and I deserve more than convenience. The hospital discharged me 3 days later, with a stack of papers I could barely carry, and a hollow feeling in my chest that wasn't physical, though the doctors had spent hours measuring my heart. Angela drove me home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other constantly checking her phone, answering messages with the occasional muttered sigh or soft tapping of her perfect fingernails against the screen. She didn't ask me how I felt. She didn't comment on the weather, the trees that were just beginning to turn, or the quiet streets of the neighborhood I'd lived in for 28 years. When we reached my house, she pulled into the driveway without turning off the engine, as if we were stopping only for a delivery. I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, unsure whether she planned to walk me inside or simply drive off the moment I closed the door. "I'll come in for a minute," she said finally, not looking at me. "Just to check the meds and fridge." I nodded, though something inside me recoiled. That tone again, efficient, impersonal, slightly irritated, as if my home were just another item on her to-do list. Inside, the house was just as I had left it, clean, quiet, faintly smelling of lemons and old wood. My hydrangeas were wilted, mail stacked neatly on the side table, a few voicemails blinking red on the answering machine I kept out of habit, though no one called anymore. Angela moved through the rooms with a clipboard she'd pulled from her bag, God knows what for, and began writing things down. She checked expiration dates in my medicine cabinet, peered into my fridge with the face of a landlord evaluating a tenant, and made a small noise of disapproval when she saw the can of condensed milk I'd saved for baking. "You shouldn't be eating this," she said. "Too much sugar." I said nothing. It wasn't a conversation. It was an audit. She moved next to my pantry, took inventory of canned goods, counted bottles, opened the junk drawer, and sighed when she found a pile of old coupons and envelopes. We need to simplify, she muttered, more to herself than to me. Then she turned to me and asked, "Do you really need all of this?" I looked at the drawer, the little packets of salt and soy sauce I'd saved from takeout, the rubber bands and twist ties, the birthday cards from past years. "Yes," I said. "I do." She pursed her lips. "It's just clutter. It makes it hard to keep things clean. I wanted to say it was mine, that the drawer made sense to me, that order and meaning don't always look the same to everyone, but I didn't. I just closed it gently and walked to the living room. She followed. "Also," she began, "have you thought more about the documents?" I told her I hadn't. She said, "Well, we'll revisit. No rush, but you should really consider the benefits. Less pressure on you and on us." That word again, us, as if I were now outside the circle. I sat down in my armchair and picked up the blanket folded over the side, the one my mother had made for me before she died. It smelled like mothballs and eucalyptus. Angela looked at it with faint distaste. "You should get a weighted blanket. These old ones hold too much dust." She took out her phone and tapped something. "There's a sale on memory foam mattresses this weekend. I'll send you a link." I told her I didn't need a new mattress. She didn't respond, just kept scrolling. After a moment, she looked up and said, "I think we should hire someone. Not full time, just to check in, maybe clean once a week, organize, help you with groceries. We'll start with an app. There's one for seniors that's pretty streamlined." I blinked. "Angela, I'm still capable of buying groceries." She tilted her head like a therapist trying to be gentle. "But should you be?" That was the question, the real one. Not about groceries or dust or mattresses, about permission, about who was now the arbiter of what I could or couldn't do. I said nothing, and she took my silence as agreement. Later that week, I began receiving calls from unknown numbers. One was a nurse service asking when they could schedule a home safety assessment. Another was from a company offering pre-packaged meal deliveries specifically tailored to your age group. One afternoon, a woman in a mint green polo shirt knocked on my door and said she was here for the preliminary walkthrough. "Walkthrough?" I asked. "For the support plan," she replied. "Your daughter booked it." Just a quick look to assess risks. You know, carpet edges, low lighting, clutter. I stood in the doorway and looked at her, this woman with a clipboard and kind eyes who didn't seem to realize how much violence lived in her script. I told her I didn't need a walkthrough. She hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, I'm sure she left a pamphlet in my mailbox anyway." That night, I opened it. It was titled Thriving at Home, Aging with Grace and Structure. Inside were pastel illustrations of happy seniors in open floor plans, all of them smiling, compliant, visibly harmless. Not a single one looked like me. A week passed, then 2. Angela called occasionally, always during her commute, always speaking in that distracted tone, like her voice was just another background noise in the blur of her life. She asked if I'd looked into the mattress, if I'd thought about the documents, if I'd considered consolidating my medications into one of those plastic trays with the days of the week on it. I told her I preferred my own system. "But that's not safe," she said. "What if you forget?" I didn't say what I wanted to say, which was that the only thing I'd forgotten was the illusion that I still had a place in her world beyond logistics. She stopped asking how I felt, stopped telling me about the grandkids, stopped mentioning the books she used to read or the music she liked when she was a teenager. Our conversations became narrower, flatter, shaped entirely around risk management. She had turned me into a liability to be contained, a series of problems to be solved. I felt myself shrinking. Not physically. I still did my walks, still stretched in the morning, still remembered to drink water and take my pills, but something else was getting smaller. My space, my language, my presence. One day I found that she had installed a camera above my doorbell without asking. It was sleek and silent, disguised as a light fixture. It uploaded footage to her phone automatically. I called her. "Did you put a camera on my house?" She said, "It's just for your safety." "Everyone has one now." I told her to take it down. She said I was being unreasonable, that I should be grateful someone was looking out for me, that these were the kinds of things families did. I said families also asked before altering each other's homes. She didn't reply. The next morning, I called Miguel, the neighbor's son. He brought a ladder and helped me remove the device. He didn't ask questions, just handed it to me afterward with a quiet nod. I placed it in a shoebox and mailed it back to Angela with no note. She didn't mention it, but that week the calls stopped. No more questions, no more check-ins. No more daily disruptions disguised as care. Just a silence that spread through the days like fog. And I realized something then. She hadn't been offering help. She had been rehearsing control, slowly, subtly, thoroughly. And when I didn't submit to the script, she withdrew not out of spite, but because without obedience, I no longer fit her idea of what aging should look like. I didn't know what would come next. I only knew it would not be a slow erasure. Not for me, not anymore. It was a Tuesday when I woke up before dawn and realized the house no longer felt like mine, not because someone had taken it from me, not legally, not yet, but because the air inside had shifted into something unfamiliar, something monitored, pre-approved, pre-diagnosed. I sat in the kitchen with my tea, strong, oversteeped, the way I liked it, and stared at the window, not through it, but at the reflection of myself, a face I still recognized, though it had grown softer at the edges, more lined, more silent than it used to be, but it was still mine. And for the first time in weeks, I wondered whether I had let that face become a version others could edit without my permission. The tea cooled slowly. I didn't move. I watched the sky change outside, gray into blue, blue into pale gold, and thought about the drawer where I kept my old documents, the ones Angela hadn't touched yet. I rose, walked to the back bedroom, and opened the bottom drawer of the desk. The file was still there, bound in a red ribbon my sister had once tied around a stack of letters. Inside, my original insurance policy, my house deed, my birth certificate, a few clippings from the days I worked at the clinic, a small photo of me in my nursing uniform, smiling without makeup, hair pinned back, eyes focused on something just out of frame. I ran my fingers over the page and thought about that woman, the one who knew how to chart symptoms, how to change bandages, how to comfort strangers. I'd been sharp once, essential. I had never felt disposable, until now. I took the photo and tucked it into my wallet. That was the first decision I made that week that felt entirely mine. The second came the next morning. I opened the medicine cabinet and emptied the plastic pill organizer Angela had insisted I use into the sink. The tiny compartments had started to feel like judgments. I returned each bottle to its original position, labeled and upright, because I knew exactly what I took and when. I had for years. I didn't need her version of safe. I needed my version of seen. That same day, I went into the garage, moved aside the box labeled seasonal, and pulled out an old suitcase. Worn leather, one wheel slightly crooked. The one I'd used to visit my sister in Albuquerque before her stroke. I dusted it off. I didn't pack anything yet. but I placed it near the front door, just visible, just enough to feel like a possibility. A few days later, I caught the bus downtown. It had been years since I'd used public transit, but the routes hadn't changed much. I sat near the window and watched the city pass in fragments, corner stores with faded signs, children walking in clusters, older women with plastic bags balanced on their knees. I got off at the public library. I didn't go inside. I just stood outside it for a while, staring at the columns, the old stone steps, the glass doors that caught the sky in crooked angles. Then I turned and walked 2 blocks west to the community center. There was a bulletin board in the hallway. On it, flyers for chair yoga, food pantry hours, lost pets, and near the bottom, a note written in blocky blue ink. Room for rent. Quiet lady preferred. Kitchen shared. No drama. $500 per month. Call before 6 p.m. I copied the number onto a napkin and folded it into my pocket. I didn't call. Not yet. But knowing it was there, that some place in the world had a room with no cameras, no checklists, no adult daughters micromanaging the color of the sheets, that meant something. That evening, Angela called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Wanted to talk about the fall risk assessment I scheduled for next week. Don't worry, it's not intrusive. They just make recommendations. Let me know if Thursday works. I deleted the message. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen. I drew 2 columns. One was labeled theirs, the other mine. Under theirs, I wrote everything Angela had tried to arrange for me: pill trays, safety rails, dietary charts, social worker calls. Under mine, I wrote tea, books, my garden gloves, the name of the bakery owner who always gave me the slightly burnt loaf because he said I liked things with character. When I finished the list, I stared at it. Then I tore it in half, burned the theirs side in the kitchen sink. The fire was small but sure. It smelled like paper and citrus. I slept that night with the window open, the air cool against my skin, and I didn't feel watched. In the morning, I made a decision. I called the number on the napkin. A woman answered. Her voice was rough, a little impatient, not unfriendly. I said I was calling about the room. She asked how old I was. I told her. She asked if I was clean, quiet, and not the sob story type. I said yes to all 3. She gave me an address, told me to come see it the next day. Bring cash, she said. First week's rent if you're serious. I said I was. I hung up and felt my chest expand. Not relief, not fear, just space. Space I hadn't felt in weeks. That afternoon, I took out the suitcase and began packing. Not everything, just what mattered. 2 changes of clothes, my toothbrush, my medications, the photograph from my nursing days, the small jade plant from the kitchen windowsill. I left the tea kettle on the stove. I left the embroidered dish towel. I didn't want to take my whole life. I just wanted to start one. I wrote Angela a note. Short, kind. I'm fine. I'm safe. I need some time. That's only mine. I didn't leave a return address. I didn't owe her that. The next morning, I locked the door behind me and walked to the bus stop. My suitcase rattled behind me like a small, loyal dog. The sky was overcast, soft with light, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to stillness. Not because everything was okay, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to make it so. I didn't know where this new room would lead. I didn't know if it would be comfortable or strange or lonely. I only knew it would be mine. That was enough to begin. It took exactly 3 days for the quiet to become something I trusted again. The room I had rented was small, sparsely furnished with a twin bed, a metal-framed chair, and a chipped dresser that smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. The window faced the street, and every morning I sat beside it, sipping weak coffee from a thrifted mug, watching people walk by with grocery bags, school backpacks, umbrellas, and errands etched onto their faces. The woman who rented me the room was named Marcy, though she asked me to call her just M. She was in her late 60s, maybe older, wiry and fast-moving, with the kind of voice that always sounded like it had just run out of patience. But she was fair and quiet, and asked no questions beyond rent and whether I liked mushrooms in my eggs. I had brought only what I needed. My clothes hung on wire hangers, my pills rested in a ceramic dish, and my photo, me in my old nursing uniform, stood propped against the mirror. The suitcase lived under the bed, zipped, still dusty from its years in the garage. I didn't unpack it completely. I wanted it there as a reminder, not of escape, but of possibility. I hadn't turned my phone on since leaving. I told myself it was for my peace, but in truth, I didn't want to know if she had called. I didn't want to hear her voice layered in urgency, apology, or worse, performative concern. I didn't want messages dressed in the language of daughterly devotion, not after months of being spoken to like a task, an aging checklist, a brittle branch too close to breaking. I wanted silence, because in silence, I could still pretend the part of her that remembered who I was, who I am, had not died completely. On the fourth morning, a letter arrived, not to my room, but to the bakery below. It was handed to me by the young woman who worked mornings, all dyed hair and tired eyes, who said, "Are you Elena Ruiz? This came for you." It had no return address. The handwriting was too careful, too round. I opened it at the bus stop. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper with 6 words written in dark blue ink. "Grandma, are you okay? It's Kieran, my grandson, Angela's oldest. He was 12 the last time I babysat him for a weekend, the time he cried when I left and asked if I'd still be alive when he turned 16. He had been the only one who called me on birthdays without being reminded, who once gave me a handmade card that read, 'You're the boss of the cookies in my heart.' I folded the letter with trembling hands and placed it in my coat pocket. I didn't cry. I simply breathed and felt something move inside me, something that had curled up weeks ago, now stirring in the warmth of his words. That afternoon, I bought a simple notebook and a blue pen. I sat at the tiny desk in my rented room and wrote a letter back. I told him I was safe, that I was thinking, that I needed time. I didn't mention his mother. I didn't ask why she hadn't reached out. I didn't want to bring poison into the only clean line of communication I had left. I ended the letter with, "You were always kind. I never forgot that." I addressed it to the P.O. box listed on the envelope and mailed it the next morning before breakfast. 2 days later, M handed me a second envelope. Same handwriting, same careful blue ink. "They're looking for you," it said. "There's been a lot of talk. Mom's been crying. Dad's been furious. They said they thought you were in the garden, and by the time they realized you'd left, you were already gone. But I know that's not true. I saw her packing paperwork the night before. I think she knew." That last sentence made my fingers go cold. I think she knew. So this hadn't been a miscommunication, not a panic, not a rushed moment where they'd assumed I was in another room. She had prepared, she had planned, and still she pretended it had been an accident. I remembered her voice in the hospital, the word resources, the way she tried to get me to sign those papers, all filled out in advance. I wondered how long she had been imagining a version of life without me in it, not through death, but through disappearance. Kieran ended his letter with, "If you want me to stop writing, I will. But if you want to talk, I'm here. No pressure, just me." I wrote back that same night, told him about the bakery smells, about the cat that liked to watch birds from the gutter, about the peace of being somewhere no one had pre-decided my future. I asked if he was okay, if school was still annoying, if he still liked pistachio ice cream. I told him not to worry, and for a while, that was enough. We wrote every few days. No one else reached out. No police, no calls, no legal threats. I had half expected that, feared it even, but also knew that Angela's pride was too sharp to allow her to look publicly alarmed. But what I hadn't expected was the newspaper. Em brought it upstairs one morning, folded in half, the front page of the local section facing up. "Is this about you?" she asked, then walked away without waiting for a reply. The headline read, "Family desperate for missing matriarch. Daughter pleads for safe return." Beneath it, a photograph of me holding a pie at some long-forgotten family event, smiling with my mouth closed, unaware that one day this image would be used as proof of someone else's performance of care. The article was filled with Angela's voice. "We're heartbroken," she had said. "We just want to know she's safe." This isn't like her, but it was. This version of me, the one who left, who refused the silent hospice of obedience, that was more me than I had been in years. There was a quote from Adam, too, my son-in-law, something about how I was a proud woman, independent, but also fragile. Fragile, as if I were made of lace and coughs, as if pride and fragility were incompatible. I cut the article out, folded it once, and placed it under the jade plant. Not as a keepsake, but as evidence, proof of how quickly stories get rewritten when the protagonist refuses to stick to the script. The next letter from Kieran was short. "They know you're okay," he wrote. "I told them I'd heard from you. I didn't say where. I just said you were safe, that you were thinking." Mom was quiet for a long time. She didn't get mad, just quiet. Then came the visit. It happened on a Thursday, mid-afternoon. I was working part-time now at the bakery below. They'd needed help with packaging, cleaning trays, and preparing the display cases for morning. The work was honest, warm, smelled like butter and cinnamon. I wore an apron and kept my hair tied back. Customers didn't look twice at me. I was just a woman behind the glass. Then I saw her, Angela, standing across the street in a navy coat, her eyes fixed on the window. She didn't come in. She didn't wave. She watched me for a moment, then turned and walked away. I said nothing to anyone, but that night I locked the door twice, and when I checked the hallway, I saw a slip of paper tucked under the mat. A note. It read, "Please call, just to talk. We miss you. You're still Mom." I tore it in half, not from anger, but from clarity. That version of Mom no longer existed. It had been filed away, managed, scheduled, and replaced with something palatable, something she could control. But I wasn't that version, not anymore. Days passed, then a letter arrived, not from Kieran, not from anyone I knew. It was on firm legal letterhead. From a lawyer representing Angela and Adam, requesting a wellness check, asserting concern over my condition, asking for a response to confirm I was of sound mind. I held the letter for an hour before responding. I wrote, "I am safe. I am well. I have retained independent counsel. Any further contact will be interpreted as harassment. Do not mistake absence for instability." I signed my name slowly, cleanly, like a signature reclaiming its shape. M offered to walk it to the post for me, but I told her I wanted to deliver it myself. The act of dropping it into the box was ceremonial, final. A closing argument without apology. I didn't hear from them again, but I saw Kieran 1 week later. He came to town. Didn't say why, just said he wanted to see the bookstore on Main. We met at a diner. We didn't hug right away. We just sat. He told me he missed my stories, that no one else knew how to sit in silence without making it awkward. I told him he was always welcome, but only him. No middlemen, no interpreters, no filtered versions. He nodded. He understood. That night, I gave him a key, not to my room, but to my mailbox, so he could keep writing, so I could keep hearing the voice of someone who remembered who I was before they tried to retire me into silence. The letters continued. So did my life, quiet, steady, mine. It happened on a Wednesday morning that began like any other, with the smell of yeast rising from the bakery below and the dull clatter of delivery carts scraping across the alley pavement. I had already watered the jade plant, laid out my cardigan for the shift later, and sliced 2 pieces of toast that I planned to eat slowly, the way I had learned to do since silence had become something I didn't dread. But something in the air that morning felt sharper, not ominous exactly, but expectant, like a page waiting to be written. I went to the dresser and opened the small drawer where I kept a shoebox tied with twine. Inside were documents I had gathered quietly over the past few weeks. My updated health proxy, my notarized letter revoking all previous powers of attorney, my rental agreement with M, a new will written with the help of a legal clinic at the A community center, and a prepaid funeral plan I'd arranged with a modest parlor 2 blocks from the train station. Everything was dated, signed, stamped, and backed by the kind of legal redundancy that made people like Angela back off. I had even filed a formal notice at my bank removing her as a secondary contact. There were no more gray areas. Every trace of their control had been severed, surgically, carefully, and now I held the closing stitch in my hand, a final document I had been drafting in secret for weeks, a personal letter, addressed not to Angela or Adam or even to Kieran, but to the institution they all quietly leaned on, the healthcare board that governed the hospital where I had been nearly written off. It was not a lawsuit, but a testimony, a statement of events with dates, names, and quotes, not just what had been said, but how it had been said. She's had her life. Let's not escalate unnecessarily. We need to be mindful of resources. I included the fact that my policy had been fully active, that no resuscitation limits had been requested by me, and that I had been conscious and denied agency until the insurance verification triggered a change in care. I did not write it in the language of revenge. I wrote it in the language of record, because that is what I was now, a woman who records, who remembers, who refuses erasure. I walked the 10 blocks to the administrative office and handed the sealed envelope to the receptionist. She looked at it, looked at me, and asked if it was urgent. I said, "It's necessary." That was all. Then I turned and left. I didn't look back. I walked to the bus stop and felt no weight in my chest, no tremor in my hands. The sun had broken through the gray clouds. I squinted against it and kept walking. That afternoon, I returned to the bakery and tied on my apron. I cleaned the trays, arranged the croissants, greeted customers with a quiet smile. M didn't ask where I had been. She never asked questions she didn't need the answers to. But when I came back upstairs that evening, there was a brown envelope slid under my door. Inside was a letter from Kieran, dated 3 days earlier. They've stopped asking. I think they know now that you're really gone. Not gone like dead. Gone like out of reach. Mom doesn't talk about you. Dad made a joke the other night and she didn't laugh. I think maybe they didn't expect you to stay gone this long. I read that sentence twice. Stay gone. As if they had imagined I would drift for a while, then return like a humbled animal to the cage. As if freedom were a tantrum and not a reclamation. But I hadn't disappeared. I had repositioned myself in full view, just somewhere they couldn't touch. That night, I burned the last copy of The Power of Attorney Angela had drafted. I held it over the kitchen sink with the tongs M used for bagels and watched the flame travel through her perfect signature. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative, like filing a form that should have never existed. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I simply watched the ink curl into ash. A week later, I received a letter from the hospital board. It was brief, acknowledged receipt, promised an internal review, offered a formal apology for any perception of diminished agency during your recent care. I smiled at that, perception, but I let it stand. I didn't need them to name the crime. I only needed it on record. That night, I wrote a final letter to Kieran. I told him I loved him, that I was proud of his voice, the way he had found me without demanding anything. I said that some inheritances are not money or property, but clarity, that I hoped he would remember how I left, and more importantly, why. I told him I would write again when I had more to say, but for now, I needed stillness. I slipped the letter into the box outside the corner store and watched the mailman collect it hours later. As he walked away, I felt something close inside me. Not a door, but a circle, a completed shape. There was no dramatic moment, no confrontation, no final phone call full of tears. The climax had already happened. In the choosing, the act, the record, the rest was quiet, clean, mine. There is a stillness now that no longer feels like waiting. It is not the stillness of loneliness, nor the stillness of fear. It is the stillness of a room that belongs only to me, where each object has a purpose and a memory, and none of them are arranged for anyone else's approval. My mornings begin early, not because I have somewhere urgent to be, but because the soft light through the east-facing window feels like a small kind of welcome, a wordless invitation to sit, to breathe, to notice. I boil water in the dented kettle Em lent me weeks ago and pour it over the tea leaves I keep in a reused spice jar. I don't rush. The flavor deepens when it's left alone. I eat toast with too much butter and sometimes jam, even though the doctor once told me to watch my sugars. I walk to the corner store when I need milk, and the clerk, who never learned my name but always remembers my face, calls me ma'am with a respectful nod, and that is enough. I do not need affection from strangers. I need only recognition. My body is slower now, but not fragile. I move with care, not because I fear falling, but because I value where I step. There is no one here to correct the way I load a dishwasher, no one to tell me which towel is for show and which is for use. My choices are not small. They are mine. On Wednesdays, I still work a short shift at the bakery, packaging the breads and cleaning the display shelves. The owners offered to give me more hours, but I said no. I want time, not tasks. I walk home slowly, past the park where the trees are beginning to gold at the edges. Children scream and run, and their mothers sit on benches with phones or books or eyes closed against the sun. None of them look at me, and I no longer wonder if I am invisible. I have learned that visibility is not the same as value. Kieran writes less now. He is 17, and his letters come once every few weeks, sometimes typed, sometimes scribbled in pen, between schoolwork and exams, but they still arrive. Each one signed, Love, K. That's all I need. I do not ask for secrets. I do not need reports. I only want him to know that the path out of erasure exists and that it is survivable. I never moved back. I never returned their calls. I kept my silence not as punishment, but as protection. Mine, theirs, everyone's. Sometimes women like me are expected to forgive quickly, to make the discomfort disappear. But silence, when chosen, is not emptiness. It is a boundary. I have become someone who protects her own name, her own hours, her own story. I think of Angela now the way I think of a closed book, read, known, understood, and shelved. Not with anger, not with regret, just with completion. She made choices, so did I. We are both living with them, and that is what adulthood truly means. Sometimes I pass by old women on the street, thin-shouldered, cardiganed, carrying bags with small items no one else bothered to get for them. And I wonder how many of them are living stories no one bothered to ask about. I see them and I nod, and sometimes they nod back, as if some part of them recognizes something in me that isn't spoken aloud. If you are reading this and you are one of those women, if you have been softened to the point of disappearance, if you have been scheduled into submission, spoken over, translated, or gently erased, I want you to know it is not too late. You do not need anyone's permission to return to yourself, not even theirs, especially not theirs. You can leave, you can stay, you can reclaim, you can be kind without being silent, you can be old without being obsolete, you can be alone without being abandoned. You are not waste. You are not an afterthought. You are not a line item on someone else's spreadsheet. You are a record, a witness, a whole archive of unsaid things. Say them if you wish, or keep them. Either way, they are yours. I have nothing left to prove and everything left to feel. My name is Elena. I live in a rented room above a bakery. I eat toast slowly. I burn my own letters. And for the first time in decades, I am not afraid to die. Not because I am ready to go, but because I finally remember how it feels to live.